Okay, let's begin this operational breakdown. We're going to examine the battle for Guernica from a strictly military perspective. The key time frame is April 28th to the 30th, 1937. These are the days a series of maneuvers took place that would ultimately rupture the Basque front. Our focus here is not on politics, but on the pure military doctrine and tactics that defined this critical moment in the Vizcaya campaign.
And just so we're all on the same page, the intelligence for this entire analysis comes from one source, the meticulous research of Colonel F.J. Victor Rodrigo. We are sticking exclusively to his military framework to understand these events, with no outside commentary.
Here's our briefing structure. First, we'll assess the strategic and tactical situation on the ground. Then, we'll conduct an operational analysis of the bombing. After that, we'll move to the decisive ground offensive. Next, we'll cover the occupation and the inevitable counterattacks. And finally, we'll lay out the immediate tactical consequences of the entire operation. All right, first up, the strategic situation. To really understand the decisions made, we have to appreciate the terrain and the disposition of forces before the main engagement began. So why was Guernica so important from a military standpoint? Well, look at the map. It was a critical communications hub. It controlled the road network connecting key towns like Bermeo and Bilbao. But the real prize, the most critical piece of infrastructure, was the Renteria Bridge, the last viable crossing over the Alco River. If you wanted to advance on Bilbao from this direction, you had to control that bridge. And make no mistake, the town itself was a hard military target. It wasn't just a symbolic capital. You had factories like Uncera y Campanilla producing thousands of pistols. You had other facilities manufacturing aviation bombs and mortars. On top of all that, it served as a rear area base for roughly 2 battalions of reserve troops and several command posts. It was a vital operational center for the defense. By April 26th, the tactical situation for the Basque army was, frankly, collapsing. Durango was on the verge of falling, and nationalist brigades were pushing deep, creating a very dangerous pocket around Marquina. This pressure triggered a chaotic, largely disorganized retreat. Basque units were forced to fall back and try to form a new, hasty defensive line centered on Guernica. This map gives you the wider operational context. You can see the momentum of the nationalist advance. They were gaining ground so quickly because, in large part, they were facing a very fragile defense. The source is quite clear on this point. Many of the Republican units were just that, units in name only. They lacked the training, the command structure, and the equipment necessary to stand up to a modern, organized military force. Okay, now let's turn to the bombing itself. We're going to analyze the air raid of April 26th from a purely operational point of view. What was its military objective, and what was its actual impact on the battlefield? The attack began in the late afternoon. It came in waves, with German bombers first dropping high explosives to break open the buildings, followed by incendiaries to set them ablaze. Now, the human cost, well, that remains a point of major contention. The official Basque government figure claimed over 1,600 fatalities. However, the actual burial records from the town itself suggest a number closer to 200. So from a professional military perspective, what is the source's assessment of this operation? It is absolutely damning. The conclusion is that the bombing was militarily unnecessary, strategically disastrous, and morally unacceptable. The strategic fallout was immediate and, for the nationalists, severe. You see, this was an operation carried out exclusively by the German Condor Legion. Franco's own high command was completely in the dark. They actually found out about it from foreign news reports. This created enormous friction, and infuriated Franco allegedly gave a direct order that this was never to happen again and specifically forbade the mass bombing of Bilbao, an order, it's worth noting, that was obeyed. Now we move to the ground offensive, because while the bombing is what everyone remembers, it was this maneuver that actually broke the back of the Basque front. On April 28th, 2 columns from the 4th Navarra Brigade pushed forward out of Marquina and Bolivar. They advanced with a speed that the Basque command simply did not anticipate. In fact, they moved so quickly that by the time they were just a few kilometers from Guernica, a total vacuum had opened up in the defense. There was practically nothing left to stop them. At dawn on the 29th, a final, desperate Basque counterattack was launched. It was easily swatted aside. Seizing the opportunity, nationalist armored cars simply rolled down the main road and entered Guernica without a fight. And as a final blow to the defense, they captured the sector commander himself, Colonel Arturo Llarch, right in the city. So, taking the town was one thing, but holding it was another. Let's now look at the consolidation phase and the fierce Republican counterattacks that immediately followed. On April 30th, the Basque forces hit back, and they hit back hard with a major counteroffensive. Their objective was clear: seize the critical high ground overlooking the area, specifically Quota 430 and Monte Garano. The plan was to try and encircle and trap the lead nationalist elements at Urchua. And just how intense was this fighting? Well, the key nationalist position at Urchua was hit by 5 separate, determined assaults. A force of 2,000 men, supported by armored cars, threw themselves at the nationalist lines 5 different times, and 5 times they were beaten back. So after all the fighting, what was the bottom line? Let's examine the immediate tactical consequences and see exactly how the front line had been redrawn. And here is the tangible result. By the end of April 30th, the entire Guernica-Durango-Amboto defensive line had been shattered. This new front line represented a decisive tactical victory for the nationalists. The road to Bilbao was now essentially open. And this brings us to the central doctrinal question of this analysis. The world remembers the bombing, but given the speed of the advance against a defense that was already collapsing, was it actually the ground maneuver and not the air operation that was the truly decisive factor in the rupture of this front? For those who wish to conduct a more detailed analysis of this campaign, the primary source material at batallasguerracivil.es is the definitive reference. That concludes this operational breakdown.